Welcome back from lunch. For those that are interested in the articles, just a reminder, all the extra copies of the articles, and we usually make about, I think we made 40 to 50 of them just to have on hand. If you were interested in another article, you didn't go to that, they're out on the main table next to registration. So help yourself to as many of the copies as you want if they're still there as you're leaving, or if you step out to refill coffee, whatever, they'll still be there waiting for you to take them. So what we're going to do with going deeper today is, usually that's action time around what we did from the morning. For those who were here this morning, though, you know we got to that grade book and assessment. Hang on a minute, I'll lock that table down for you. Good catch. So we're going to table the activity around that grade. I want to get into the narrative writing in the laps. I want to get into some analysis of that because that lap concept is a pretty cool concept. And then we'll spend probably the rest of this time letting you explore that activity I teased out about grading and looking at grading and assessment overall. So our purpose remains learning from the experts of Penny Kittle and Kelly Gallagher and using their work to support our conversations. I mean, we're having them anyway, as they are. Our inclusion activity. So what I'd like you to do is just start with what was the most important point of learning from the morning session. So take a minute and think through that. And then at the end of that minute, I'll have you partner up and share that out with your partner as to most important learning from the morning. Okay? Holding silence. Then conversations to a close. All right. So thanks for delving into that, for that important point from the morning that we pulled from it. And as I've mentioned, I'm going to jump back here. And remember we talked this morning about narrative writing and getting into the laps of narrative writing. So in the book, as we talked about mapping out the year, and so in mapping out the year, there's also an idea of mapping out narrative writing itself, as there will be for informational and then argument and then the multi-genre. In mapping out what narrative writing might look like as a whole, there are these different components. We're going to delve more deeply into the actual teaching part of it, which there are the laps, and that's the part we're going to delve into. But in the overview piece, they talk about timing, what our expectations are, what the teaching may look like, looking at an essential question that's going to guide where we're going with our writing. And then that whole idea, what they use the terminology of that rhythm of a study. So there's the launch, the heart, and the end. As they elaborate on the launch, the heart, and the end, one thing, if you're familiar with Lucy Calkins' language, it's more called the bend in the road. In the MESA units, it's referred to as that concept. So there are those big concepts. And the concepts really live around launching, for example, is getting ideas, right? So obviously there's a launch to a unit, but it's about kids getting ideas on the paper. What does it look like to get ideas down on the paper? The heart of the unit then is taking those ideas and elaborating on them, right? Elaboration, expanding on the thinking, expanding on the idea. And then the end of the unit is getting into the adjustments, the revisions, making it better, if you will, leading to that eventual publish. So that whole piece of launch, heart, and end, it was interesting how they use terminology similar to what I hear from folks and how they described what those bends are, and then what I know from what the concepts are in the MESA units themselves. And then the idea of reflecting. We always want to reflect, right? Again, even in here, as much as I try to abide for that time, that's the time I always end up shortchanging, that you definitely want to provide that opportunity for kids to reflect on the unit and what that looks like. So with that, right, those are things you're used to delving into. So what does it look like then to consider? So the approach they take, it starts on 141-ish, 41. They talk about this idea of the laps. What's interesting in the lap, and Kelly Gallagher actually used it even so much as to say, like, laps in the pool, that the more laps, the first lap's a pretty easy lap. But yet it's still something you have to do before you can do 2 laps. And you got to do 2 laps before you do 3, right? Or we've all been there when we've picked up swimming or we've been messing around with it, and you're like, whoo! After 2 laps, you're like, man, I'm done with this. So you build yourself up to the 3rd lap. You build yourself up to being able to do 4 laps, etc. You can't just show up and swim 4 laps of the pool, not without wondering if you're going to make it. So that is really unique. I really appreciate the concept he brings to the table with that, and it just makes sense, right, when we think about how building that stamina, building that energy up. And so they go through these laps. So I thought what we would do is we're going to number off, and as we number off around the room, what I'll do is I'll take these poster boards and put up numbers, and then we'll go to those places. So whatever number you're given, you're going to read that lap. Laps 1 and 2 are a little bit longer in page number covered, but there's more student models given. So I think they end up being similar in page number. But take notes around the lap, the number you count off, and then I'll probably do 5 to 7 minutes and kind of read the room on that. Then what we'll do is we'll branch off to where that is, and we're going to have each number group create like a chart paper and then give an overview of what lap 1's about, what lap 2's about, lap 3, and lap 4. And then I'll take pictures of those and put them up on the Google Doc for you. All right? So first things first, we're going to number off around the room, so let's do that. So we'll start here. Okay? So then whatever number you were, that's the section you're going to read. So lap 1 starts on 142. Lap 2 starts on 152. Lap 3, so if you were a 3, I think that's 162. They're going 10 pages at a time. Pretty interesting, but like I said, just happened to work out that way. Lap 3 starts on 163, actually. And then lap 4 starts on 166. So we'll start with about 5 minutes, so just make notes, and then at the end of the 5 minutes, I'll move you to the next part of the room for that piece. So right now it's just analysis around the lap number. And then conversations to a close. So if we stay by our spots, we're going to just have each group kind of overview. We'll start with lap 1 and just kind of overview our high points. Yeah, I'm going to take pictures of them. Okay. So the fact that the swivel, you're probably okay with the fact that the swivel won't necessarily get the greatest visual, but we'll hear the sound great. So.
Excellent. Is this a record? I've never held one of these. This is awesome.
Go ahead. Should be good.
Okay, so for lap 1, this is really like the beginning stages of just trying to get used to writing and writing about themselves and creating their own stories. And so this lap is really demonstrated by a lot of quick writes, multiple quick writes often. So using it to start learning how to generate their own ideas. We use this through looking at a lot of mentor texts, specifically smaller ones like poems, especially poems that relate to sensory things and personal experiences. And then using those to kind of craft their own and developing off of that. The assessments for the first lap, we kind of reverted back to kind of what we talked about this morning with the grading, being like that first level 20-point assignment is their final assessment for this lap 1, being like a 100-word memoir where they're crafting this one piece, but it's smaller, it's a little bit lower stakes, but there is some sort of assessment at the end. And we're looking for how good are they at understanding the craft and using that in their own writing. And then what the teacher is doing is a lot of modeling over and over and over again, almost as much as the students are writing, we are writing in front of them and revising in front of them. And then producing one polished piece of writing, which is in Penny Kittle's is the 100-word memoir.
So I think you see a lot of scaffolding, right? So I think we speak to the concept of scaffolding, and I think sometimes we're not sure what that looks like. And so I think I appreciate you bring out the mentor text, you bring out the modeling, teacher alongside student writing, right? That balance so they can see it. It makes it less daunting to have something to emulate or build from overall. So thank you. Thank you, lap 1. All right, moving over here to lap 2. We're all warmed up, ready to go for lap 2 in the pool. Who's going to lead us? No, we didn't.
Oh, I am.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, no problem. Thank you.
Yeah, excited to do this. So in lap 2, we decided that some of the most important factors were that they were focusing in on crafting one specific scene. So there had been many ideas gathered and many writes done, but then we were going to craft one specifically. And one of the things that we really saw they pointed out was there were 2 different versions of what students had done. The first version and then a second version that we could compare alongside of it. And we saw that was linked to the fact that they had a bunch of mentor texts that were suggested for specific ideas and what they were going to target and focus in on the lessons, and then employ in their own writing and see how, when they looked at the old version and the new version, how things had changed. And so that was one of the things that we thought would be very effective. And they called that studying the moves, and they thought that these were real eye-openers, is what some of the members thought from our team. We also thought it was very powerful just to have the students analyzing good writing so that they could look at it, and then to use things that are not technically, correct, run-on sentences and other types of creative punctuation that allowed them to creatively express themselves. And that was a sort of a different take on how things can be done. And so that essentially was Lab 2.
Questions or clarifications? Wondering. I'm wondering about analyze good writing. Is that referring to the student or student good writing, or is it still looking at professional writing?
We were still looking at mentor texts and other pieces that were targeting specific skills that they wanted to highlight, and giving them good examples and just giving them time to read them and then be able to say, well, what was good about this? What did we notice? And have them learn how to do that.
I know that in there, I couldn't remember what lab it was in, they started talking about looking at student work and moving that forward. So in lab 1, right, we've got, hey, here's a text, let's emulate the text. Now in lab 2, we're getting into more of like, here's a move, bring that move into the mix. You can see that progression or lesser scaffolding that's happening, yet still very structured in that you're going to try this, here's a model of it, etc. So moving along that line. So it's a little more difficult. So, all right, well, thank you, lab 2. Appreciate it. Moving over to lab 3. Perfect.
All right, so lab 3, we start to get into like all the scenes together. And so it's focused around like how the scenes are built. If it's like scene 1, scene 2, scene 3. Still studying mentor text. So looking at, but different like specific parts of a mentor text. And then when we get into the actual modeling, before that, let me back up a sec. So before that, then the kids are thinking about how are we going to put the scenes together. They almost rehearse the scenes as they're going through. So they would get together in a group and they would talk about how they think each scene would go together. So it's really putting more of it, I keep saying together, I'm sorry. And then modeling, so then the teacher would model and plan different storyboards, also how the kids are putting that together. And then looking at a specific part of a passage, so then the teacher would model that as well, and the kids would really think about what the rhythm of that. So the teacher would model that, the kids would model that, and kind of go through and study that. So the passage study. Revisions are based on like the sentence structure that they found in the mentor text, so like the section of the mentor text that they're looking at, and just looking at how they can perform the same rhythm or whatever they're focused on. It talked about like the flashbacks and flash forwards and stuff too. So more of the specific structure, I guess, so even getting more detailed. So.
Questions or wonderings for lab 3? So I think where we went somewhat more complex in what students might generate, the biggest shift here was less of really copying and more getting into specific moves and looking at that. And when I say copying, I mean emulating. And then here, we're keeping the same idea of looking for moves, but now what we're asking them to produce becomes more complex by bringing those other pieces into the mix. So it's still the same type of instructional moves likely as we were in Lab 2, but we're asking more of the students and what they're doing maybe at this point. And again, yes, there was a progression of what we were asking, but now that raises to another level. And in order to help students get there, we're using the same strategies from Lab 2 to help them get to that next point. So, great. And then Lab 4. Thank you, by the way, Lab 3. Appreciate it. Lab 4? Perfect. They all walked away. So.
Right?
Proximity got you.
I guess so. That's all right. I think that's why they all went over there. Just FYI. On Lab 4, we're looking at taking it even deeper by looking at a multi-narrator type of writing and realizing and understanding all the different kinds of points of view people have from one situation. And hoping that lets our students know that there's a voice for all, helping to build empathy with our students. The teacher, she had never done this before. Penny hadn't. So this was new to her at the same time. So she was taking a big risk as a teacher, and she was learning alongside them. And I think that is helpful when you're doing something that's a little bit deeper, when you're trying to go deeper, to really be vulnerable like that with your students. The students will hopefully find their own writing voice through this process, because now not only are they seeing one side, but they're seeing all sides of the story and realizing and understand that even though the situation has happened, everybody's going to view it a different way. And hoping that the challenges of the mini lessons, looking at so many different varieties of techniques, because you're basically doing differentiated instruction at this point with each of your students. And that's it.
Questions, wonderings for Lab 4? Obviously,
Right.
this is getting to a new level of complexity, and I heard already that I know we have obviously a high number of folks from Otsego, and so we talked about even implementing that into a current structure you have around where challenging kids to go to next steps, something to that effect, right? So, like, if they're getting this down, where might they go next? So, and bringing it into that piece. So, yeah, and I think it's key what you hit on, that idea of even if it's something we've not done before, and I think Penny actually just throws that out there to the kids, and I think there's a video component on it, and she says, help me with this. And I remember, now that I'm saying this, in the webinar, they did it around something that was a passion of theirs, and not Penny, but Penny spoke, can't remember what Penny spoke to, but Kelly, the reason it stuck in my head is there was obviously being Gallagher, there's an Irish component, and there was some Irish song that was played at his grandfather's funeral that he then, I think, had played at his father's funeral. And so he actually had that playing as he was talking about it and generating in front of students to help him go deeper into it, where he was kind of trying to tell this story of how this song impacted the family and what that looked like. And so it was a really vulnerable moment. I can't remember. That one really obviously caught me, and maybe that was all that they showed the highlight of. But they each had done that and made themselves vulnerable and picked a pretty sensitive topic to speak to, which really showed something for the students that way. So, all right, thank you, Lab 4. Appreciate it. And if you'd thank your teams at your different labs, and we'll come back to our tables. All right, so I did have an activity on the narrative writing piece, but I think we can do that. I'm going to just jump ahead to that, and I'll give us a few minutes to delve deeper into the narrative writing. Then we'll come back to this assessment and grading activity. So around these laps of narrative writing, some good conversation to have, right? So on page 141, just a reminder, it isn't quite such a reminder since we just did it, but that overview, but then the different laps. And so I just summarized them here. But the activity that I want you to delve into is focus on narrative writing. What's your current scope and sequence of skills you introduce within narrative writing, whatever that might be? Mentor text you might use, or activities, if you don't have mentor text. And consider that overview. And remember, the overview, I think, had some of that timing in it. And then that concept we just explored, around the laps. Okay? So reflecting on that, right? So what changes might you make in narrative, or what's going to stay the same? So what is narrative writing going to look like, considering these aspects from these authors and what they've experienced? How are you going to apply that to what you're doing overall? All right, we'll take probably 10 minutes on this, maybe 15, because this is that time. This part of the day is for you to kind of take and apply this, not so much me introducing the content, and then we'll segue from this into that assessment grading piece. Questions you might have? All right, go ahead. Come to a good stopping point, and then conversations to a close. All right, so I've had a chance to jump in on most of the groups. Thank you for delving into that work. And now I want to shift the conversation for our next 20 minutes or so from that narrative writing. So really good discussions, by the way. Thank you for pushing your own thinking around where you're currently at, or making connections. Let's take a look at this idea of balancing feedback and evaluation. Just as a reminder, right? These are the key components of the book. Here's the activity that we're going to work through. I'm really excited about this activity because I think it's very important. Knowing that grading and assessment and the terminology associated with those concepts, right, can lead to these polarizing conversations. Just had one in our article breakout for those over here. Thanks for being a part of that. How would you define these following terms? And then, as you're defining the terms listed here, think also about the stakeholders. Is it parents? Is it administration? Is it your students? Is it colleagues that you are speaking with? And will that adjust the definition or the explanation of the terminology? So when we say grade, what does that mean? When we say assessment, what does that mean? Rubric, feedback, portfolio, gradebook, progress, selection, and or reflection. These were meant to all be separate. So it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 concepts to consider. So here's my example. Love my district to death, but we made some adjustments come Common Core days. And one of the things they shifted was the scale of proficiency, whatever we want to call it. So it went to like a 4, 3, 2, 1. So I think it's even K5. I'm not sure about 5th grade. I'm pretty sure there's not letter grades there. But anyways, so my first conference I was in, it was a 4th grade conversation, and they introduced the scale, and it was explained to me what 4, 3, 2, and 1 meant. 4 was, I don't know if this is quite the right term, but I'll say advanced. 3 was proficient. 2 was like developing. And 1 was needs more practice, something like that, right? So I got these different explanations. So I don't know if you know me, but I have 5 boys. So at the time we had 3 in the building. So I got a 4th grade explanation, a 2nd grade explanation, and a kindergarten explanation. All different. And I even heard from parents, which I don't ever believe parent talk until I see the conversation for myself, right? We're all snarky that way about parents because we know how that goes. My wife will come home and say, "Oh, you won't believe what I heard." I'll be like, "Yeah, I'll believe it." When I actually talk to the person myself or meet the teacher we're discussing, let's hold our thoughts on that. But the explanation of the 4 in the 4th grade room was, I mean, honestly, Mark, seriously, can any of us ever be a 4? Really? I mean, 4 is out there, so 3s are great. And not that I asked anything. All I asked was, what does the scale mean? I didn't suggest, why does my son have 3s? I didn't say, why does he have a 2, or why doesn't he have any 4s? Didn't say anything about that. I said, can you just explain to me what your interpretation of the scale is? I know it's new to the building. What does it mean to you? And this is where I'm like, I lay low, but I just want to know information. So that was the explanation. And it got to the point where I think she felt uncomfortable, which I don't blame her, and I try not to be that way. But she said, I mean, are any of us ever a 4? And I was thinking, okay, all right. Probably not. I get it. But that goes back to, and I described this earlier, I think at the time, too, Common Core called a 4 what I would call like the Doogie Housers of the world, like the real brainiacs, and 3 was proficient, and then 2, and then 1, right? So 2nd grade room was, the explanation was, well, it's like osmosis. Like, it's something you got to be able to do, like maybe even when you're sleeping or just like while you just wake up and it's automatic. So it's like this automatic skill. Like it so well, somebody asks you the question, you're like, boom, there it is. So she said, like, so if you're sleeping on the pillow, you can do it in your sleep. That was her analogy given there. It's like, okay, all right, so that's the 4 there. In the kindergarten, it was, well, 4 is where we get at the end of the year. So we're never 4 until we get there. So we're 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, poof, 4. Okay, I get it, right? And again, I graded that way. I told my 1st grade parents that same thing, so I related to it. I mean, my understanding is completely different, but I used to sing that song. So I totally got it. But my point being, there's 3 different, and that's proficiency. I didn't even put that up here. That's proficiency, or a 4, versus a 3, versus a 2, versus a 1. And we'd been working with systems with the building principal, and I went back and I said, so how's the grading thing going? He's like, it's going. And I said, well, here's just a little anecdotal evidence for you to consider as you consider working with your system. I got 3 different versions of what the grading scale was. And he's like, you wouldn't believe it. We actually had a professional development of about 60 minutes, and we talked through the scales and what the scales are about. And I said, no, I believe it completely. Totally believe it, Sean. I totally get it. I just wanted you to have the anecdotal evidence that there's systems work to be done. Nobody in here is shocked that there's systems work to be done, right? It's just an anecdotal evidence, right? So consider that thought and my experience, as you probably have with your kids, probably even in your own district that you teach. What would these conversations look like? That terminology can become so polarizing, in the conversation. So what and how do we define these pieces and how we move forward? Because at the end of the day, what really matters is probably understanding and consistency. If you have understanding and consistency, if I would have gone in and heard the same story, whichever 3 versions I just gave you, if it was consistent from place to place, that just established to me what it actually meant when I looked at my child's report card. And honestly, like you probably know about, again, of your own children, you already knew what your child knew or didn't know or where they stood in the scope of understanding the skills because you work with them all the time. It's your own child. Just to have a consistent thought, message, approach would have been a lot more calming, I guess. And it wasn't that I was fired up because, like I said, my wife and I knew. But it made her very unsure and her not confident and her saying, well, what the heck's going on? And I'd be like, don't worry about it. Here's kind of the deal. We know best. However, we're getting this interpretation and we need to take that and react to it in an appropriate way to help our kids show that they're learning these skills. It's not about what they're evaluating. It's about us making sure the kid's modeling the skill, whatever that is. We try to own it ourselves. But anyway, so sorry to digress in the example, but I think it's fitting where these conversations can help that be less likely to happen. But a systems conversation is a tough conversation, and likely, except for in a couple, and then for Otsego, you've got folks in the room that would help with that. It's a conversation that can't just live at your building. It's got to live, or in your department is a better way to put it. It's got to live at the building. It's got to live at the district, right? There's layers that it has to live. So this is just a start. But if you aren't common as a department, that's a pretty good place to start if you ever hope for the building and then the district to get to that same point, right? We've got to all figure out how to make that universal and fit in the system. So enough of my system soapbox. Enjoy the next 15, 17 minutes of conversation around just really getting our arms wrapped around these concepts and what they look like because they are so polarizing. Questions you might have? All right. And just to be able to gather that survey data from you. So I'll put up the survey link if you want to stay and do. If you need to go, I understand. But I did get back to those of you that had the problem of practice going. And I'm going to be better at keeping track of that now. I've got myself a little more under control too. Whereas you can. So I'll just encourage you to keep up with that and move forward. I'll put the survey up. But thanks so much for your time today. And safe travels.